Don't ever forget, I can edit anything and everything out and just talk to me. Like,
I'm just going to answer your questions.
You can pretend like the viewfinder, like that's not there.
Oh. Hello.
When we were chatting with the boys last night, I realized that there's stories that I don't even know from your flight attendant days. How long were you a flight attendant for United?
2 years.
2 years. 1958,
59.
59. What was going on in your life that you wanted to become a flight attendant?
Well, I didn't really want to become a flight attendant. I had met your father, and we were both at San Diego State, and I wanted him to marry me, and he was going to go into the Air Force. So I knew he was leaving soon, and I decided when the United people came to San Diego to interview for possible stewardesses that I would go down, and I didn't think they'd ever accept me. But it would scare him enough that he'd ask me to marry him.
So you became a flight attendant so that Dad would propose?
Yes.
Okay.
And I went, and I was the shortest person there. Everybody else
How
was...
tall are you, Mom?
I'm 5 feet tall, and I was 5 feet 4 3/4 then, so I've shrunk a lot. It happens when you get older, and it's really not fair because if you're overweight anyway and you start losing height, you start gaining more.
We've talked about this. You're not overweight. You're under tall.
So at any rate, I went down there and interviewed with them, and it was all nice. And I just said, "Well, that's good," and expected John to, ask me to marry him. Not only did he not ask me to marry him, but I got accepted. And the next thing I knew, I was going off to San Francisco to be a flight attendant for United Airlines.
When they interviewed you, what was that like? Do you remember the interview process? Were there a lot of girls?
There were a lot of girls, but it was
all women, obviously. There was only women.
There was no men. And it was very interesting in my interview, and I will never forget it because it was so unique, and I still don't know why it happened that way, except that there were so many beautiful girls there. I mean, really pretty girls. So it was kind of like a beauty pageant, really, and I really was feeling very intimidated. So when I went in, there was a man sitting behind the desk, but I only saw his back. And he asked me all the questions, and he never turned around and looked at me the whole time.
What a jerk!
No, I don't think he was a jerk.
You think he was trying to base it on how you sounded rather than just how you looked?
Yeah, which kind of made me feel when I analyzed it, because he was probably trying to see how level-headed I was, because there's a lot of airheads out there, you know. And so he was probably trying to see if I was mature enough to be able to handle a job where you have people's lives in your hands, perhaps. So,
did you do a lot of safety training?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We had to go. We went to Cheyenne, Wyoming for stewardess training. Now, just imagine this. You're this bevy full of beautiful girls that just came out of college, most of them.
A bevy full of beautiful girls.
Yes.
Okay.
They're all airline stewardesses. And you drop them off at an Air Force base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where you eat all your meals with all these gorgeous-looking guys. And it was very unusual.
And she was not engaged at this point.
Yet.
Okay, so you do safety training, and had you flown on airplanes much before you became a flight attendant?
A little, not much, you know.
Because you didn't then, really.
No, nobody did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just people.
You took trains, or you drove.
People didn't take pigs and dogs and chickens and people. It wasn't like, it wasn't like it is today.
Yeah.
It was very calm, and most people didn't fly.
So you get the job as a flight attendant, you go through training, you still, at this point, are you more enthusiastic about it? Because now, did they pay very well?
Not at all. It's like the airlines at that time considered it a privilege to keep us until we...
And now, wait a minute, now, once you got married, what happened?
They made me, I have to quit.
You have to quit. Mm-hmm. So there were no married flight attendants?
No.
Not even like the head flight attendants?
No.
None of that?
No.
Okay.
In fact, when I quit, after 2 years, I was a senior stew.
Right.
They called us stewardesses, they didn't call us flight attendants. So whenever I say I was a stewardess, people know how old I am.
Yep, she's not old. She's not old. Were you based in San Francisco? Mm-hmm. And what were your living arrangements in San Francisco?
I had, we lived in San Mateo, first of all, with 3 roommates, and then we moved to an apartment at the top of Nob Hill in San Francisco, which was kind of exciting and fun. Our names were on the roster downstairs in the lobby, 4 girls, you know, and so people would
all
come.
With Miss before your
yes,
names.
All with Miss.
So it was very clear it was 4 single women.
Right.
And then tell them what you told the boys last night about how you would get free meals.
They would come knock on the door and say, "Would you girls like to go to dinner?" And depending how hungry we were, because we never got paid enough to really have any food, so we used to take the leftover desserts, and we were all smoking at that time, cigarettes off the trays, and we didn't have to worry about keeping our weight down because we didn't eat very much. And if the four of us were home, we'd say yes, we'll go to dinner. So this one time,
because you'd have a group.
That's
and you
right.
Figured if you tried to outnumber them.
We all screamed really loud, would be okay. So this one time, this guy came to the door and said, "Do you want to go out?" We said, "Yeah." We were hungry and sitting there wondering if we were going to starve to death before they called us in for another trip. And he took us to the Bimbo 365 Club, which is a very elite club. We spent then in San Francisco. Of course, we ordered everything in the world, and then we said goodbye and went home.
Bye. Thanks for dinner. So, when you got your schedule, were you like on call all the time, or did you have a schedule but then they would call you out? Like, did you have a lot of downtime, or were they working you to death?
They worked us pretty hard, and at that time there was no union. When I left, 2 years after I had started, in 1950, the end of 1959, they started getting information that we were going to have a union, and they were starting to do surveys and ask us what we thought about a union. And of course, we were in favor of someone, because the pilots, I think, had already had a union by that time.
And you guys, because it was new too, you told me that because there were no work rules, so you could get done with a trip at midnight, and then they would call you at 6. Like, so if the trip was done at midnight, that meant you weren't back to your apartment till 1 a.m., 1:15, and then they would call you at 6 a.m. to go out on a flight,
or at least earlier than they should have.
Yeah.
You know, and then so you had an option of not taking the flight, but it wasn't. It was frowned upon. So,
and you didn't get paid if you didn't take the flight, though, correct?
No, and they called it junior girling. And so the most junior that you were, the more you were apt to have that happen to you.
Okay.
But we learned to get around that by giving them different.
They would tell them that they had their period.
And we didn't feel well.
And they didn't feel well.
It was working more. It was doing overtime and not getting paid for it, basically,
Right.
is what it was.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly what
Yeah.
it was. I want you to tell the story about the rent money.
Do I have to tell that one? Okay. Remember, I was only 20, and I just celebrated my 80th birthday, and my grandsons just turned 20, so they were enjoying this story last night as I was telling it, thinking Grandma really was a bimbo when she was 20. So everybody's a little linky when they're 20. So, yes, all four of us lived in this apartment, and they had all trusted me. I have no idea why. Well, it's because the only one I cooked. I did some cooking, and nobody else did. When we had food, I knew how to cook it. So, and I didn't count the money in my wallet properly, and I spent the rent money.
On what?
Shoes and clothes, and a little angel that I liked in the Giardelli chocolate store that you could wind up and it sang to you. It was very nice.
So a 20-year-old woman seduced by shoes and chocolate.
In San Francisco.
It could happen to anybody.
Yes.
So how did you get out of that pickle, Mom?
Why, everybody does what everybody does. I called my mother.
Call your mother.
I said, Mom, I spent the rent money.
Yeah.
She said, don't worry, honey, I will send it to you. So within 24 hours, I had it. And thank God for mothers.
So I want to hear, when you traveled, where did you mostly fly to?
It just depended on you bid, just like
Dad does.
just like your
Scotty
husband
does,
does,
yeah.
like Scotty does. You bid for certain flights, and sometimes you bid flights because you had someone that you particularly liked to fly with,
Right.
you had a stewardess that you worked well with, or you wanted to go someplace. And I tried to bid Hawaii lots of times, but you have to be senior to get Hawaii.
Right.
And the longer flights, of course, were the most enjoyable because you didn't have to be so. When you had to rush a service, it was very difficult. So toward the end there, I was flying from San Francisco to LaGuardia, and that was a really
that's
nice.
really
that was
long.
that was a nice trip, but it took a long time. You know,
Yeah, because planes were, you were saying last night that planes were a lot slower.
slower.
So,
But it was long enough to do a complete first class service with silver and crystal and hot meat and delicious. I mean, the food was really pretty good.
so
there.
in a way, I mean, you were trained for safety. You were trained on how to get everybody loaded on the plane, but you also were basically like servers in a restaurant.
Little waitress, yeah.
And so what did that look like? Like in first class, what would that look like?
It was lovely. The seats were farther apart. You know, they
Right.
weren't trying to cram everybody in so they could make.
And everybody, you said everybody smoked on the plane during the flight.
Yes,
so there had
they
to have
did.
been a lot of
The
air must have been bad.
The air is bad anyway on an airplane.
Right.
So with the smoke added to it, it really was bad. It wasn't really a very healthy place.
That's crazy for me now, though, to think of sitting in an airplane with cigarette smoke everywhere. I can't even imagine.
It's crazy for me now too, and it wasn't good for our complexions. It's it's really very bad for your complexion. Anyway, it was fun. It was exciting. You could choose to go where you wanted to go, and if you got that bid, then that's where you went, just like our husbands.
You said that, tell the story, this is the story that I love. Tell the story of when, and I did not hear this story until last night, about when you got engaged to Daddy.
Well, I went into the airlines, and he went to the Air Force. And so here we were, separated and calling each other all the time.
And you had met, I think you said that earlier, but you guys had met at San Diego State, and you dated for like a year before all this happened.
Yes.
So he was a little slow on the dime there.
Well, we had fun in college though, because he was an SAE and I was a Chi Omega, so we were having a wonderful time. And I just didn't understand why he didn't ask me to marry him. I mean, he was getting out of college. What else did he have to do but get married?
What else did he have to do? Valid.
He had to go to the Air Force and have a career first. And I'm glad now that was the decision that he made. We're talking on the phone a lot, and I would come home every once in a while, and we would be able to see each other. So he decided to propose to me on a layover that I had in San Diego, which was my home base. My mother still lived there, and so I was staying with her, and then I was ready to get on my plane, and he took me there in the car, and we were in the parking lot, and he decided to propose to me then. So, of course, it took a little bit longer than it should have. And out of the corner of my eye, as I was kissing my soon-to-be husband, I saw my plane getting ready to board, and I thought, I think I better go, so I did.
Okay, so time out, because I have a lot of viewers that are a lot younger. So this was before jetways. If you've seen old movies like Casablanca or something, the planes, and especially I remember San Diego when it was like this, there was just a fence. There wasn't like a big security thing or anything. You got your bag, and I don't even think there was metal detectors. You just got on the plane. No. And there were steps. So you could see your airplane, and you could see that the people were boarding your airplane. So you saw passengers getting on, and you were the chief flight attendant, chief stewardess, what do you call it? Head stew for that flight. And you're in the car with your now fiance, and you're starting to think, I should probably go get on that plane.
So I didn't panic. I took, because you can't, you had to wear high heels then, and you had a uniform that was restrictive. It wasn't like they can do now with.
She weighed 112, and they made her wear a girdle.
Yes, all the time. And so one flight I had, some guy pinched me every time I went by his seat, every time for the whole flight. So I wonder I didn't smack him, but I didn't, because we weren't allowed to do that. So at any rate,
but you thought about it.
I did lots of times. So I got on the plane, and the two other stewardesses that were on the plane were a little upset because they didn't know how to handle a liquor service. And the liquor service was little bottles that you had of all different kinds of liquor that people would order, and they had to be cataloged so that they were sure that we weren't taking the bottles off the plane that weren't being sold to the passengers. Now that is fine, except that if you don't know how to do it, it can be complicated. So I got on the plane late and got everybody all settled. The stewardesses settled, got the announcement
But
made.
You told me too that the other flight attendants were crying. The other
They were
crying
hysterical
because they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, they knew something that I'll tell you in a little bit that I didn't know yet.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we finally took off, and I worked the flight, and did what I usually do. Finished it up, and everybody leaves, and I'm saying goodbye. We were trained on the flight. We had smaller planes, so we could almost remember everybody's first name or last name. So
you had a manifest too, right?
Yes, we
so
did.
You knew, okay.
And so we knew who was it. And we used to say, well, goodbye, Mr. Smith. Goodbye, Mrs. Smith. I hope you enjoyed your flight. It was really kind of fun. It was like having a little party on an airplane, So as everybody left, I walked and started picking up things and moved down the aisle, and I looked up, and here was a Czech stew sitting in the lounge. And a Czech stew is someone who gets on board when you don't know they're there, and they evaluate how you do your flight. And I thought, hoo-hoo, goodbye career. I'm glad I got engaged today, because I don't think I have a job. I think it's over for that career. So she said, I think we have to talk. And I thought, okay. So I sat down, and she just said, if that hadn't been the best flight I have ever seen worked in my career in the airlines, I would have fired you on the spot. And I said, and if I had it to do over again, I'd do the same thing. So it was just one of those things that I just lucked out.
And you didn't get fired.
I didn't get fired.
And you worked for several more months, and then you married Daddy.
Yep.
And the rest is history.
It's history, and you're part of that history.
Oh, that's so sweet. Are you glad you did it?
Yes, I love to travel. I always loved to travel. Came from a military family. My family moved around a lot, and there were times when I didn't like it, when you had to go to 2 new schools in 1 year.
Right.
But you had the same upbringing, because when John and I were married, of course, he was in the Air Force for a long time, and then he was an airline pilot.
It's good for you.
So it is good for you.
Builds character.
It does, and it exposes you to other people so that you're not so uptight about who you are and where you are and what you are. You're just... life is an adventure. We need to travel more to find out what else out there.
And everybody is the same.
Yeah.
They all love their children, and
That's exactly right.
They want to be safe, and they want to have
right.
a roof over their head.
Yep.
So what's been, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but what's been the biggest, I mean, you've seen so much change in air travel, and she travels still all the time. She flew here from Phoenix. We're getting ready to go on this big cruise in November. You flew to Italy a few years ago. Like, you're still traveling. Mm-hmm. Do you think, like, I look at it and I'm thinking about from when I grew up, I think probably like the security and all of that after 9/11 is what's been the most drastic. You know, you can't even say goodbye to people in the airport anymore. But with all the change that you've seen, what's been like the biggest change?
Well, I think the biggest change is the amount of people who fly. I know a lot of us who do fly and pay full price don't think that it's economical, but it is, and compared to what it used to be. It used to be just executives and things like that. So our clientele, were almost all first class people who could afford first class. And there weren't very many people traveling. Do you remember when you were little, we used to take you to Hawaii every summer, and people would go ooh and ah when we got on the airplane because people didn't travel with 3 small children at that time.
That was just too expensive.
You couldn't do it.
I'd be interested to go back and look at allowing for inflation, the price of a ticket back then. You're right. I remember being on the 747 when we would fly to Hawaii, and they had that cocktail lounge. And I remember you said too that you used to play cards with the passengers during the flight.
On a trip from San Francisco to LaGuardia, I could do a first class service, clean up the galley, and walk back into the lounge and play bridge with the passengers. And
so the DC-8 was not a big plane, but it still had a lounge where people could go and play cards.
Yes, it was kind of like a little corner in the back.
So thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
Barbara, you did such a good job.
Oh.
I am so grateful that you had such an adventurous life, because I do think that is what people ask me all the time. Why are you so willing to go out and do all these things? And yes, it was because we traveled a lot when I was growing up. But you never hesitated. Dad would be traveling somewhere, you'd go and run around a strange city by yourself. She did teach me a trick before cell phones. You get a matchbook from the hotel lobby, and if you're in a foreign country and you don't know where you are, you hail a taxi and you show them the matchbook, and they will take you back to your hotel.
Yes.
All right, Mommy, well, here, cheers. I love you.
Thank you, I love you too.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, guys, be good to each other. I'll talk to you next time. Good job, Mama. That was awesome.